Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope we are all in a good health in these challenging times due to COVID-19 pandemic. This event is undergraduate and postgraduate program of Department of Social Welfare, Faculty of Social and Political Science, University of Indonesia. We are proudly present this international public lecture with them Green Social Work Contribution to Environmental Impact of COVID-19 Pandemic. This public lecture is intended to increase the knowledge, insight, understanding of undergraduate and postgraduate students of the Social Welfare Department of Faculty of Social and Political Science, University of Indonesia on green social work perspective. Today agenda is, sorry, I will read the opening, and we will start with a welcoming speech from Department of Social Welfare, and then we start to presentation of Professor Lena, and then a question and answer session, and then closing remark from Professor Lena, and then we close about 2 hours from now. So for the first, we can welcoming speech or welcoming notes from Department of Social Welfare. From we can, yeah, Sari or some.
Hello. Hello, Ibu Dini. Hello, Prof. Lena. Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, my voice. I got cold, so I think
I'm sorry.
yeah. Okay, but yeah, okay. Thank you, but Ibu Dini as a moderator, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great honor for me to welcome you to International Public Lecture, and I'm very thankful to Professor Lena Dominelli, Ph.D. from the University of Stirling to attend this event. And I'm also thankful to Ibu Dini Widinarsih, Ph.D., our senior lecturer at Department of Social Welfare. And I'm also thankful to Ibu Fentini Nugroho, Ph.D., of course, who initiated and arranged this event, and also Ibu Dr. Triyanti Anugrahini, who carry out a class of social welfare and environment in social welfare department. And I am especially honored to welcome the representatives from some universities. I see Bapak Rudi, ya, Pak Fedri. Okay, I cannot mention one by one, who participate in this international public lecture. Unfortunately, Professor Isbandi Rukminto Adi, head of Department of Social Welfare Science, still have one more class in this afternoon, and he will come in the next few minutes. So on behalf of Department of Social Welfare, Faculty of Social Political Sciences, Universitas Indonesia, I would like to say that it is our privilege to have this public lecture held in our department. So from the initiator of green social work, we all can learn how to contribute to environmental impact of COVID-19 pandemic. So we can see the structural inequalities, the degraded environment. So there are so many various changes, and we have to adapt and cope with the various kinds of new things, new behaviors. So from this international public lecture, we hope we can learn new insights, new about the uniqueness of green social work, especially how a social worker in overcoming problems in structural inequalities and in the degraded environments. So I think I wouldn't like to take too much of your time, so I will hand it over to our moderator to proceed to the main agenda. So Ibu Dini Widinarsih, Ph.D, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ibu Sari, from the representative from Department of Social Welfare of University of Indonesia, for welcoming speech to today event. So to saving the time, we will, before we start the presentation from Professor Lena, let me introduce Professor Lena by reading her outstanding CV. Sorry. Professor Lena Dominelli holds a chair in social work and is director of the Master of Science in Disaster Intervention and Humanitarian Aids at the University of Stirling in Scotland. She was previously co-director at the Institute of Hazard, Risk and Resilience at Durham University. Professor Lena has a specific interest in projects on climate change and extreme weather events, including drought, flood, cold snap, wildfires, earthquake, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, disaster intervention, and pandemic, included COVID-19, with a focus on vulnerability and resilience, community engagement, co-production, and participatory action research. Professor Lena has created green social work as a new paradigm for theory and practice. So Professor Lena also is a prolific writer and has published more than 38 books, more than hundreds chapters and monographs, and almost hundreds referred journal articles, and in social work, social policy, and sociology. And several of her works are classic, translated into many languages. Her most recent major publication is Green Social Work, provides a theory and practice of disaster from a social justice and sustainability perspective. Professor Lena was a president of International Association of School of Social Work, or IASSW, from 1996 to 2004. She currently chairs AcSS Committee on Disaster Intervention, Climate Change, and Sustainability, and has represented the social work profession in the United Discussion on Climate Change since 2010. Professor Lena is a world-acclaimed social scientist, sociology, social work, and community development. She is receiving for her international contribution to critical theory and practice, including practice guidelines for humanitarian aid workers, families, and community. She has supporting social worker and providing guideline on COVID-19 since early January 2020, beginning in China. So her work has been recognized globally through various honors bestowed upon her. So this is a long-standing of her CV. So to not to do the time, so we can let the Professor Lena to present her presentation for this public lecture. So please, Professor Lena, time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I start sharing my screen, I just want to thank Ibu Fentini for inviting me. We've been saying we're going to do this for a long time pre-COVID, and I'm glad that COVID didn't stop us from doing it. So thank you, Ibu Fentini. And Ibu Dini, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm not sure I deserved it all, but I will skip on because I find things like that very embarrassing. I'd rather speak about green social work, about which I'm very passionate. So I'm going to share the screen, and I'm going to, can you see my screen at the moment? Can you see my screen? Sorry, there's just a few things I have to get rid of. They keep coming up every time I move from A to B. But can you see my screen now with the slides?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I will now begin the slideshow, and hopefully you will all be able to see it in big letters. So that's okay. Great. When technology is working. So I'm going to talk about green social work mainly because I think it's a new paradigm, but it is really, really important in today's society that we start to consider what we need to do to live in closer harmony with our environment. And I have to say, I do have a hoarse voice from speaking too much and looking at the computer and talking on the computer. So if you see me drinking tea, please just ignore it. I will just do it and carry on. But what I wanted to do is tell you about what green social work is so that we can see how we can fit it into our everyday lives, both as social workers and as people sharing planet Earth with many other living things like the animals, the plants, and the earth around us. And I want to link it also to what you can do in your social work practice to become more green, or hopefully you will adopt green social work as your paradigm for practice by the time I finish. So I will define what green social work is and then look at it in practice. And I make some suggestions for how we can protect the planet and secure environmental justice for everybody, because no one really, in a period of climate change disasters like today, and Indonesia gets more than its fair share of climate change influences on your weather, on your climate, and it affects everything, your water supplies and everything else. And the fact that, you know, Jakarta is sinking in the ocean. As the ocean levels rise, you will sink quicker. So, you know, and I know people are talking about moving the capital to another place. And I think, oh, how awful. It's such a beautiful capital. So instead of moving the capital, can we change people's behavior so that they start doing something about climate change right away? And even if we do that, it will still take some time for the environment to get rid of the carbon dioxide that is already in the atmosphere, because carbon dioxide takes a long time for the earth to get rid of it naturally. So why did I produce a new paradigm, as Dini said in the introduction? The answer for me is very simple. There have been many social workers, especially in the US and Canada, that have been looking at what they called environmental social work or eco-social work. And I think what they did was good, but it was not good enough. So when I looked at what they had done, thought about it, looked at research that had been done, looked at my experience, especially in working in your part of the world, but I did try to come to Indonesia then, but I didn't make it because I couldn't get any connections with local people at the time when the 2004 disaster struck, the tsunami. So I ended up in Sri Lanka and did a lot of work there. But it seems to me that some scientists, physical scientists in Oxford, are saying that climate change and the warming of the oceans is creating more earthquakes in the oceans underwater, which is what started the 2004 tsunami, and earthquakes. And Indonesia has all of that. And he also added that it also increased the number of volcanic eruptions. And Indonesia has all of those as well. So in that sense, Indonesia typifies a country that is challenged by many of the outcomes produced by the fact that people all over the world have not done anything about climate change And certainly in the West, but increasingly in China and in India and in Russia, which are not even in the Annex 1 countries of the Kyoto Protocol, they are now bigger emitters of carbon dioxide than the West, including China has surpassed the US as the #1 polluter. It is building one new coal-fired power station every other day. So that's 150 new ones a year, which is unsustainable and unnecessary, I would add, from a green perspective, because we have renewable energy, which everyone should have access to. Now, the problem is, and I had this problem when I went to the UN and suggested that green renewable energy technology should be given free to everyone in the world, because I'm a social worker interested in social justice, and people can't afford it otherwise. I know I cannot, and I'm not poor, I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable, middle-class professional, but I cannot afford to pay £16,000 for a solar panel. So I have to use other means to reduce my carbon footprint, which I do. But that's the same story for the majority of the world's population, unless governments come in to help. Now, our government in the UK has started a Green Deal, which means that it will help householders to get things like solar panels by giving them up to £16,000 to renew their energy sources in a green, renewable way, which I think is good. But it's not good enough just to have a tiny little country like England with 62 million people doing that. Everybody in the world has to do that. So we have to figure out how we as green social workers can argue that this is a crucial social issue that everyone, from child to older person, has to be involved in. And we as professionals need to lobby, including the UN. I can tell you when I tried to lobby them, and I said, so don't make this mistake, I said, we need to increase taxes on companies. We need to hold companies accountable, especially multinationals who make a lot of profits and money, not pay their fair share of taxes because they can get away with it. Now, the G7 has said they want them to pay at least 15%, but that is nothing compared to what ordinary people, certainly in the West, do. So I think there still is an issue there. But I was told by the people representing governments in the UN, they said, our companies, this is the Americans particularly, our companies pay more than enough taxes, not enough taxes. And so we don't think we can follow your suggestion. Well, I only had one government, Canada and the US. The US was there, but Canada and the UK were not. They weren't even there listening to the discussion, which I was very angry about because I have close links to both countries. But the Swedes were the only government that said, yes, you are right, but you are wrong to call it a tax. You should call it a development fund. So please learn from my mistake. Don't call it a tax, because instantly rich people will get, we pay too much, which is not true according to the statistics. And I had the statistics and presented them, but you know, people's emotions get in the way of statistics. So they don't want to pay more, so they won't listen to an academic saying, here's the statistic. This is how much money you earned last year. This is how much you paid in taxes. Not enough. I wanted to take 10% of their after-tax profits to help the environment and eradicate poverty, because poverty and climate change are linked in that the poorest people are the ones who suffer most from climate change. And I'll go into that in more detail. So that was why I wanted to change the paradigm, because the social work and environmental social work did not look at capitalist social formations and how we create wealth and how we manufacture goods. Another example is that goods have built-in obsolescence. So they will tell you when you buy a computer, it's not going to be good for you after 3 years. It won't work. Well, when I left Durham, I had a computer that was eight years old. And when I handed it in, the person who received it said, "Lena, this looks like it's brand new." And I said, "Yes, because I take care of the equipment I have so that it lasts me a long time." I wish I could say that with the current one I'm using, which is an American Dell. The old one was Toshiba, but Toshiba decided not to produce any more laptops. Don't ask me why, probably not profitable enough. And the Dell has given me problems since day one. So it just confirmed some of my prejudices about what is happening with the way things are being built. So that is one thing we can do, which affects our daily life, is to start saying to companies, we want things built to last, because the earth does not have an unlimited supply of resources. And many of the resources that go into producing smartphones and laptops are the rare earth minerals. And there's only 2 countries that have these things. One is China and the other one is Canada. Everywhere else does not have access to rare earth minerals. So we must protect their use by extending their life. And they can do that. It's all a decision made by the shareholders and the people who own multinational companies, because they can make more money. If I have to replace it every 3 years than replacing it every 10 or 20 years, which is what I would like to do. And I hasten to add that in the old days, now I'm old enough to remember the old days, they did produce equipment that was built to last. So I am using a cooker, which is 60 years old, and it still works perfectly. 60. And everybody comes and looks and says, "Oh, that's interesting. You haven't got a new cooker then." This is what I'm telling you. I am green to the core. It will give up one day, I know that, but I'm going to use it until it does. So this is what I mean. Everyday life, you can make decisions which support the health of the environment and the ability, because why am I doing this? It's because I think I am fairly privileged vis-a-vis poor people in the global south. So I need to be very careful about my demands on the earth for resources, because other people need to access these too. And I remember our First Nations people in Canada who said, and I was very young when they said this, but I've never forgotten it. We people are custodians of the earth. In other words, we have to look after the earth so it can look after us. And I took that to heart from the day I heard it, and I will always be grateful to them for that insight. So, with that long introduction about why green social work, let me tell you what it is, and then we'll carry on talking about it. But as you can see, I am very bad at talking to these slides, which is why I want to control when I change them. And I hope you'll forgive me for that, but I think it makes the talk much more interesting because I can give you stories as I go along. But the definition is really important because it does focus on how we organize our society, the relationship between us as people and between us and the animals and the plants that live with us. And they need our care, not our destruction. And that's why we need to lobby multinational companies especially to understand that they cannot just go and use the earth as a means to an end, the end being making profits for them, because that is what has produced the socioeconomic and physical environmental crises that are undermining our well-being and that of Mother Earth. Now, why do I say the environmental crises have done this? It's because the environment is what supports our capacity to live on this planet. And so we must protect it. And I am very against these explorations into outer space. Let's see if we can find another like planet Earth, which will protect us and provide us with the resources we need. The answer is absolutely not, because if we do, we will simply destroy those planets like we're in danger of doing here with our own planet. And secondly, if we're getting people to go into outer space, that is costing us carbon dioxide and other lethal gas emissions. They're all going into the atmosphere and they're causing air pollution, which certainly is affecting me. That's one of the reasons I have a hoarse voice. And it's affecting millions of people. 7 million people die of air pollution a year on the planet at the moment. And that's only the figures that we have, which I consider a serious underestimate, because you won't find my problems with air pollution on the statistics, for the simple reason that I try to look after myself. I don't go to the doctor to ask for help. So that's why green social work is absolutely essential to help us deal with the crucial, critical problems that we have. So what do? Well, first of all, and this is nothing new to social work, because we are a change-oriented profession, and we know this from the definition of social work. And so we have profound, holistic, conceptual understandings of the world, and we are change agents who want social transformation. So that is principle number one. Number two recognizes the interdependency between peoples and between people and the environment, including the animals and the plants that we live amongst. And so we need to argue for sustainable relationships, not rip-off relationships amongst living things in the inanimate world. And also, and this is really important for us under COVID, because we now know the price, the horrendous price, the millions of people who have died, including in my country, over 127,000 people have died from COVID. Why? Because we went into the natural environment, not worrying about what we did when we went in there, destroyed it by degrading the environment. And this is pristine environments, and then brought the viruses, which were always there since time immemorial amongst the animals, but they weren't affecting us. So we built no immunity to them because they were in their kingdom and we were in ours. But the minute we transgress that barrier to get resources, and we suffer. And Indonesia must take this message seriously, because your tropical forests, and you have plenty of them, which are like the Earth's lungs, are being destroyed at a horrendous rate. And why? To produce palm oil plantations. And why? Because some company has decided, they can make a lot of money by putting palm oil into everything. And let me tell you that I look at everything to see what ingredients. Now, we have a law in the UK that says we must know what the ingredients are, because some people are allergic to some ingredients, so they have to know before they buy them and use them in case they die. But I did this, and I even taught my son to do this from the word go. So I started looking at some, and this is only in the last couple of years, I started noticing palm oil is in everything. In butter, which is produced by cows, and milk. We take the cream off. It has no need for palm oil. I don't know why they put it in there. Then I am vegetarian, like I know many people in Indonesia are. And so I looked at, I used to use olive oil butter because that is a nice natural product. And I noticed they were putting palm oil in there. And I thought, what on earth are they doing putting palm oil in a vegetable-based already product? It's in your shampoo. It's in nearly everything you touch or eat or use. So I started my personal boycott because I can do that. And every lecture that I give, I tell people to join me in that personal boycott because it is unnecessary for us to destroy tropical forests, because palm oil won't grow in the temperate forests that are in the northern hemisphere, to say, no, we do not want palm oil plantations. There are some things, and you will be better and more knowledgeable about this than me, where palm oil grows naturally, people have started using it for their things. But I, in the UK, do not need palm oil for oil. Why? Because we grow rapeseed, for example. We even grow grapes in southern England. So we can make oil from rapeseed, which is very good, and from grapeseed, which is very expensive. But we have alternatives that are local. We do not need to bring in something just to produce profits from some company. And I haven't had the time to explore why this became so prevalent. It may be that some companies have lobbied their governments to say, let us do this because it's healthy. Well, it may be healthy, but it's environmentally destructive. And green social workers have to call that out and then live their lives in ways that walk the talk. So that's really important if we want to end more pandemics like COVID-19. And we know the price we pay as human beings is brutal. And we should not have to do that. We would not need to do that if we treated nature with respect, like the respect we want to be treated with ourselves. And finally, the other important principle of green social work is transdisciplinarity. We need to really acknowledge that we need the help of other scientists. Now, when I was working in Durham, I had access to some of the top scientists in the world in any subject I wanted, because Durham is a big university. And I really miss that. Stirling is a great university, but it's a small university and does not have all the physical science disciplines that Durham has. So I have kept my connections with Durham because as a green social worker, I know I need them and they need me. I've just been contacted just the other day by one of my colleagues at Durham saying, help, Lena, we need you in the physical sciences. We're doing this, this, and this. Can you come in and join us on this project? And I was delighted. So of course I said yes. And that's why we need to work across our disciplines. The information that we need. I'm sorry about this is not true. It's one of the problems with this computer, and even the IT people haven't been able to fix it. So, but it's not true. My computer is plugged in. It has lots of battery power. But anyway, so just ignore it because I will. I just click it off as you noticed me doing before, but it is annoying. So the other thing that I did was to say, okay, we are social workers. We are a social justice and human rights-based profession, which is great. And I'm not going to go into the struggles we had to make it so. But when I started looking at how we define social justice, we left out environmental justice. So as a green social worker, I decided that in my meetings with IASSW, when we were talking about the international definition of social work, I wanted environmental justice included in there as a specific item because I said it is not the recognized issue in most social work schools. And that's not acceptable anymore. It might have been fine when we first worried about social justice in the 80s around equality for marginalized and disadvantaged groups. But now our knowledge has moved beyond that. And we know it's the same groups who suffered from social injustice before who are also suffering from environmental injustice. So I've defined it as the right to a sustainable, healthy environment. And to make it sustainable, I have argued that we need to use the environment's resources to meet our needs today, but also leave enough in the earth to meet the needs of our future generations, our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. And again, First Nations in Canada will tell you, as custodians, we are responsible for 7 generations. That goes a long way into the future. And if all of us did that by the way we lived our lives, we would have a sustainable approach and wouldn't have to worry about environmental injustice like we do now. The other one is that it is really important that we as people accept we have a duty or a responsibility to care for and Mother Earth and care about others who are living on the planet as well as ourselves. And that goes back to what I was saying before about interdependence. We are interdependent. So if I go around treating the earth as my waste sink and using everything I have access to without a care in the world, I would be reducing the possibility of you having access to those resources. That's because if I use something beyond what I need, it will mean that there will be less for other people to use for what they need. So we really have to take this interdependence between us very seriously. And that interdependence goes to the earth itself, because the earth is what provides us with the resources to do the things that people have amazingly done when you think how far we've developed in the millennia that we've been around on planet Earth. The other thing is that this responsibility is holistic. So I cannot ignore the political, the social, the physical, the economic, the cultural elements within our environment, because they all are interdependent on each other. And if I do one thing to one, it will have impacts on the other things. So if I say, okay, I don't care that my government is not going to go for net zero until 2045, I can just carry on doing what I want to do. But that is such a false way of looking at it, because, and so it means I lobby my government. So I write to my MPs to say, I am not happy about you saying you're doing well because it's 5 years before the Paris Agreement tells you, because we know now from later reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that we only have 12 years from 2015, so now more like 9 years, to get our act together. We should be going for net zero in the next 10 years, basically. And if we don't do that, we will be adding to the misery that climate change produces. And we will be adding to our own misery, because there will be new viruses, COVID-19, which is really called the SARS-CoV-2 virus, to give it its proper name, is not going to be the last one. If we keep doing what we're doing, we will be bringing more viruses from the animal kingdom into the human kingdom. And that will not be something that will happen without a price. We will pay the price if we're not alert. Now, there are lots of things I could say about COVID-19, but maybe we'll leave that for the questions, because I think we could have stopped COVID-19 like we did MERS and SARS-1, really. by acting together as a global community, which we did not and have not yet under COVID-19, which is because we have leaders all over the world who are very unimaginative and very insular. So they just say, oh, I have to protect my own people. Yes, you do, but you have to protect other people's people too, which is where, you know, sharing vaccines, sharing green technologies is an important part of that. But, you know, people like me, and thank God there are many more like me, at least in the UK, are not giving up. And I know from the young people's movement that led by Greta Thunberg that she is worried about climate change and has galvanized young people through the Fridays for Future movement. And so all power to her, and I certainly see myself as one of her supporters. So we can do our bit by lobbying our government and say, stop being so silly, because if we don't protect everybody from these diseases and from the degradation of the environment, we will all suffer. And, you know, it will mean, for example, with climate change, never mind not having the resources we need and becoming sick, some countries will sink into the sea and they will be looking to move somewhere else. So migration is going to be a huge issue in the future if we do not stop climate change. And the estimates of how many people will move range from 250 million, which is huge. At the moment, there are only 182 million people who are migrating, and most of them migrate within the global south, not from the global south to the global north, but that will not be the case because the global south will be the countries most affected by climate change. So that will not be the case in the future. And some estimates go up to 1 billion people having to move. That is 1/7 of the Earth's population. That is going to mean huge implications for other countries, because we are going to have to accept people coming in to be saved from the destruction that we as people have wrought on the environment. And so I can only say, let's look closely at what we're doing, because what we're doing is terrible and it is too little, too late. And here, let me give you another example. China said, yes, net zero, but unfortunately, we're not even going to make the 2050 target set, which they agreed to, the Paris Accord, because we need to take all our people out of poverty, which is true. They have the right to development as every person on earth. Since 1986, there has been an act which has been signed by all members of the UN saying every person on earth has the right to development. But they are going to go on till 2060. And my heart sinks when I think, does that mean more coal-powered stations? Will they be capturing the carbon emissions that go out and destroy the environment? I suspect not, because it's more expensive. But to give China its due, it has got the biggest renewable energy program on the planet. But it is too small for the number of people that need energy. And everyone has the right to energy because we all need it to do most of the things that we've got used to. And so we have to look at ways of increasing capacity in the green renewable energy sectors as quickly as possible. 2060 is 40 years away. Most children who will be living then under awful conditions haven't even been born yet. So that is why it is very serious. And China has the largest population on earth. So it's going to need a lot of resources to care for every single one of those people at a decent level of living, which is everyone's right. India, same thing. India currently is not producing a lot of carbon emissions, but it's on a huge industrialization program. India is the second largest country in the world in terms of populations, but both India and China are huge geographic entities as well. And they're saying, we can't do anything until 2060 either, for the same reasons as China. And my response is, A, yes, you have a right to development. B, we need to get rid of poverty across the world. C, we can only do that safely by going for green renewables. And D, the West that has the patents on green renewable energy must make these available to everyone who wants them free so that they can develop. And then, you know, I always say to companies that have a go at me for saying it has to be free, but poor people can't afford these. If I, as a reasonably well-paid middle-class professional, can't afford the technologies without help, how can a poor person afford them? And I know because I did the Giles Gate project in Durham, and we had to help with a company who agreed, because it was a socially responsible one, to provide resources. But the minute the policies changed, they said we can't do it anymore, and they went bust. We don't want that to happen. So we have to get the public and the private sectors working together to make the best possible arrangements for a green future for everyone. And that means sharing that technology. And I used to say to them, you know what, if you give them the technology free, you can charge them when they make every unit. So for every solar panel, say, that they make in Indonesia, for the sake of argument, you can have a small, and I think we ought to put constraints on how much profit companies can make. Like some companies, big ones, are saying, we haven't made enough profits this year. When you look at their profits, they made 40% more than they did the year before. And I think that's outrageous. And I know Islam, because I lived in an Islamic country in Algeria for 3 years, has a limit, as Christians did a long time ago, of 5%. And that seems to me, that's a reasonable amount of profit, because if they can give us solar panels that will only cost a couple of £100 each to cover costs, plus add 5% to that, that's £10. So it would be £210. That is much more affordable than 16,000 or more pounds. So I think, and where people can't afford them at all, like they did in M.Si in Argentina, an NGO decided to give everyone solar paneled stoves so that they could cook on, pumps, and heating arrangements so that women would not have to walk miles to get water and firewood to produce the energy they needed. And that little village alone is saving 80,000 megatons of CO2 emissions every year. Just that tiny little intervention by community development workers. So social workers have lots of things they can do, and I'll talk more about that later. But I tried to capture my ideas because they are very complex, but we need that complexity to do the job that we need to do and to avoid falling into the traps that eco-social work and environmental social work did. So I've tried to capture it simply in this chart, which, you know, I've sent the slides to Fentini, and Ibu Fentini, if you can give them to everybody, that's fine, because I would like them to have access to this slide and use it. So I talk about neoliberalism because that is the system of capitalism we're currently living under. That privileges the private sector and unfortunately privileges private greed over public good. We can't afford that as a world. And that's because it degrades our environment, which I've got down at the bottom circle down here. So we need to protect that environment. Because we're green social workers, the practice we do is where all these three different dimensions come together. First of all, we have to affirm human rights and social justice. And remember, for me, social justice includes environmental justice, which is why I had to add that third circle. We have to continue the old struggles we had about social injustice before we started thinking. And that is because poverty, particularly unequal health and access to health, unequal access to education are still there, unequal access to housing. All of these things need our attention. We cannot say, oh, we're going to look at environmental degradation now, somebody else can look after those other issues. We have to do both. Now, one person may choose to focus on one instead of another, but as a profession, we have to do both. So if some people are tackling structural inequalities, great, let them do it. The rest of us have to tackle environmental degradation. And we who are tackling environmental degradation benefit from the work that is done in tackling broader structural inequalities like poverty. Like, for example, I think, you know, a good example is when I was in China working on earthquakes with people there. We went to a remote rural village. And I was talking to the people through an interpreter, and I was noticing they were building new houses. And I know, as an earthquake expert in the social sciences, knowing a little bit about the physical sciences and the civil engineering behind it, they were building new houses with walls that were going like that, right? Joined like that. And I thought, if an earthquake comes, they'll just come down, and because of what they're made, they'll pulverize. They'll become a source of killing people, basically, fatalities. So I said to them through the interpreter, why, when the building code in China says you need to earthquake-proof your building, why are you not doing that? Because they should have been building buildings with rods. My fingers are iron rods going through the concrete to hold it together so that when it shook, you see, it still holds together, doesn't it? It doesn't slip when it shakes. And they said, and this is poverty, yeah? They said, well, if we did that, it would add 10% to our costs because they build to have more than one generation together in the rural areas. And we couldn't afford that. So it's about poverty, isn't it? It's not that they didn't know. They said they knew the rules, but they said, well, we can't afford it. And anyway, it's unlikely an earthquake will happen here. And I just hope they're right. But China is like a honeycomb of earthquake faults. So nowhere in China is safe from earthquakes. So I think, and I haven't looked at the Indonesian, you could go to either the British seismological survey or the American seismological survey, and you can find what the faults, known faults, of course, in your countries are, and they have them for all countries in the world, and they are available online. So my heart just sank, and I thought we need to tackle those structural inequalities. It wasn't good enough just to think down here that if we mitigated the disaster by having earthquake-proof buildings, which we know how to do that, but even that doesn't give you 100% protection because the 1986 Kobe earthquake in Japan, all the houses were earthquake-proof, but a lot of them couldn't withstand the shake that the earth gave them because it depends on so many factors, and we don't always know what all the factors are. So it's not a guarantee, it's only a mitigation, which means reducing risk, not eliminating risk. unfortunately, that's our science isn't good enough yet to be able to calculate all the factors that go into everything. And the other
Professor Elena, I'm sorry, I just want to remind you that the time is 15 minutes. Any more?
Okay, all right. So we have to enhance resilience, and we as social workers are very good at doing that. So I have already talked about working with the physical scientists, and the reasons for this are to reduce vulnerability, to mitigate the risk and enhance community resistance. And we can use them to assess and respond to community needs and reduce the damage to people, livelihoods, and physical environments. And that's really important, because if we don't do that, we cannot reduce deaths to the minimum possible. Why is it that in the UK, we have floods? We have floods everywhere, every year, pretty much. But, you know, we think it's a tragedy having the floods, but a greater tragedy when 2 people die. If you're in Mozambique, the lack of a good physical infrastructure means you'll have thousands dying. So we need those physical scientists there to tell us how to build. So you build, you know, flood-proof buildings by building them on stilts or on arches, and don't build on floodplains. So we know what we do. But the other thing that we need to do is link scientific with local knowledges. And I have given you an example of how I use the local knowledge of the First Nations in Canada, because I have Canadian origins, to link to the scientific information that I have. And we also have to work together to co-produce solutions and have collective solutions for solving problems. And you will see that in my chart, there's co-production and using research to inform us about what we need to do to make better policies. Now, I told you that poverty aggravates the impact of disasters, and rich people will have the best earthquake-proof houses and non-flooding houses and all the rest of it. So they suffer less in disasters. That's not to say that they won't have some damage. And actually, from the UK's experience of flooding, rich people are less, not more, less resilient than poor people, mainly because poor people have had to get used to surviving with very little. And you can see there the figures. 1,645, they've now gone up by over 1,000 people owning. Now it's 10 trillion, not 6.4 trillion. But, you know, it's also unequal. Rich women are a lot fewer than the men. And look at the damages. Most of it occurs in the global south. Terrible. And it's because, as I said before, lack of built infrastructure throughout the whole of society, every element, houses, hospitals, medical clinics, schools, etc. And the lack of resources to recover. So poor people rely on social networks mainly to recover and sharing resources between them. But they don't have the money, the materials, or the insurance unless they get them externally. And then there's lots of inequalities that are already there that hit disadvantaged people most. And we know from Hurricane Katrina that Ward 9 was the worst hit area. That's where African Americans live. But if you look at this beautiful picture from Sri Lanka during the tsunami, I have to laugh every time I look at it. Tsunami tested rooms. It is humorous, but very serious in its message, saying, come, help us recover by coming and eating in here. So that's very important. And as I said before, we cannot go on industrializing and building mega cities. This is Xi'an in China. This is what I saw from outside my bedroom window in the hotel. And I was above the road. It's terrible that we are building like this because it costs the earth a lot to build like this instead of low rise like we used to. So we have to limit, as I said before, that's the whole point of green social work. And I've talked about the other things. And here's examples. Wildfires, they happen because of climate change. Floods, I told you about the guy from Oxford saying even Merapi is being affected. And terrorism. Did you know that the Syrian conflict started off as a fight over water when 1 million people from southwest Syria moved to southeast Syria because of a drought, and their crops wouldn't grow? Ask Al Gore, he'll tell you, because he's the one who told me. Now, you shouldn't be frightened of green social work, because you do, the same things you always did. Assess, coordinate, assist, support, advocate. Only the context is different. You're looking at environmental degradation rather than people's relationships with each other. You're looking at their relationship with Mother Earth. Sorry, this wretched, I'm suffering from air pollution in pollen, which is natural, but it's because industrialization has affected my lungs. Anyway, let me just carry on. Just ignore it. I do. But this is our process of engagement. We've done this for some reason or other. Two-way communication has disappeared from there, so it should have two-way communication. Ventini, I will fix that on your slides if it's missing, but it wasn't missing when I was looking at it this morning, because I would have fixed it otherwise. But it means that we have to engage with our community residents as well as the other stakeholders. Anytime a shock comes, reevaluating and going through this cycle. All of you know this, it's common social work practice. And here in the resilient cycle, these are the stages of the disaster. And this is what we do as social work. This is what green social work has added. Participatory action, research, assessment, reciprocal learning. Learn from the people you're working with. Don't pretend that you're the expert and knows everything. You probably know less than they do. So go for bottom-up models, mobilize people, and evaluate what you do. And here's an example of Canada where social workers built a roof garden to be green, and you can grow vegetables and plants and flowers and everything on there. But make sure you get a civil engineer to help you, because you need 9 layers to be able to build a roof garden and make sure that it doesn't fall in like what happened in Hong Kong, one of the universities there that didn't do that. And here's what you can do with recycling. Now, my hat is made out of plastic bags. Antoinette's, and Ibu Fintini, you will know her. Her bag, her handbag, is made of plastic bags. And here's what the women are doing with the plastic bags. They're crocheting them into jackets, shoes, everything you can make, they're making with plastic bags. And these 2 women, this one made Ventini's handbag, and this woman made my hat. So, and they are self-sufficient. It's the Erasmus community in South Africa, and they make their own bricks. They are self-sufficient to try and reduce the demands on planet Earth. And in my second to the last slide, I want to make one point which is fundamental to us as a human rights-based profession, and that is we can use what every country that is a member of the UN has signed up to, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because we can use Articles 22 to 27 to argue for food, clothing, shelter, education, and health for the people that we work with. And since we work with poor people, it can be a great poverty alleviation strategy to demand the resources they need that they are entitled to and that countries have said they will give them. They didn't say how or who is going to pay for it, but that's a discussion that you can have. And also, it means that we can ask for accountability from corporations by demanding they pay people the rate for the job, not go looking for where they can pay the least so that they can make more profits. And this is my last slide because I conclude that if we practice holistically and look at everything we know about structural inequalities, plus what we learned from green social work, we can actually change our world and make it a better place for everyone. We can reduce the impact of living on Earth in terms of climate change, and social workers are crucial to that debate, like they were in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Because if you didn't know, I'm telling you now, IASSW had 19 social workers from 1947 helping Eleanor Roosevelt, whose picture you see here, draft that. And that's why human rights and social justice are so fundamental to the Universal Declaration. We were there affecting what happened. And the last slide here is us teaching green social work. So thank you. That's it. And I hope that you learned a lot from that brief introduction, even though it was about an hour, I should think, of discussion.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Lena, for your insightful presentation. So we can move to the question and answer session. So let me choose maybe the participant in this virtual class can raise hand and present the question by yourself to Professor Lena. Time is yours. Okay.
Yeah, don't feel shy.
Okay.
Use the chat if you want to. Type your questions because I will look at it as well. But it would be nice to.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
It is always good to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So before some participants to present their questions, there are questions in the chat. Maybe you can explain it. The answer. There are questions that what is the difference?
You'll have to read it out. There's no question in my chat. Nothing.
Yeah, she chat personally to me that
Okay.
maybe you can explain more about the difference between green social work and ecological social work. What is the difference and how?
Ecological social work.
Ecological social work.
As I said, ecological social work focuses only on the environment and says we should use the environment responsibly. We should not degrade it. Full stop. That's it. What it does not do is tell you part of the problem we face in the degraded environment is the way we produce our goods to live. It's food, and I gave you the example of the palm oil, whether it's clothing, anything, we use a lot, like some clothes. I try to buy clothes that are natural fibers, but some clothes are made out of petroleum. That is a fossil fuel. Why are we wasting a scarce resource building clothes out of plastic material when we could be using linen, flax, hemp, cotton, many other natural resources, bamboo? They're even making clothes out of bamboo, which grows like crazy. So that is the difference. My analysis is about we have to look at our lifestyles, what we do to reach our lifestyles, because if we're overusing fossil fuels, we should keep them for what we really need them for. Like, for example, some medicines are made out of petroleum. Now, those medicines we can't make any other way. So I'm not saying there is no need for fossil fuel consumption, but we do not need it to heat our homes. We do not need it to travel because we can use electricity. It's still not good enough that the government has to give our researchers in the universities the money to do research to improve what we know already so that we can become better at it. But we can reduce everything a lot by going to naturally sourced materials, which we used to. You know, fossil fuels were not used until about 2,000 years ago. They used to use water for energy. I can tell you that the cotton that was brought from North America to England to make cloth in Yorkshire was powered by steam and by water mills. We still have those water mills. You can go and see them. They're museum pieces. They're still there, but nobody uses them. We used to travel by water, canals built all over the country to transport goods. Yeah. Now we're using diesel to transport our goods by trucks or lorries or by trains, which are still using diesel instead of electricity. So we do have a responsibility to ask those questions. How can I achieve a decent lifestyle? Because I am not like some people who argue that we should give up our lifestyles. I'm saying we have to change our lifestyles to get a decent lifestyle sustainably through green renewable energy sources. Like I gave you the example of M.Si Rumi. The Ureta tree was being disseminated. It was becoming extinct because women had to go and pick the firewood to heat their homes, to cook and everything else. But the minute they got solar power, and they have lots of solar energy in most parts of the world, but certainly in Argentina. And so they got solar panels, solar cooking facilities, and suddenly they're saving 80,000. Each one of us, like in the UK, I know the average consumption of carbon dioxide and emission into the atmosphere by each person in the UK is 6 megatons. In the US, it's 12 megatons. I would expect it to be more like around 2 in Indonesia, because you still have many poor rural areas that still have to industrialize. Even China is not using 12 megatons per person because there are so many poor people in China. Therefore, their consumption is less. But the rich people in China who are going to all parts of the world will be consuming even more than the average American. And those are averages. They do not tell you that the rich people in America will be consuming at least twice that amount. And a homeless person in America, like a homeless person in England, will not be producing more than 1. That's the statistics we have. A homeless person in America, because they have nothing, will be producing 1 gigaton. So they're more like people in the global south than the rich people in the global north, or even the average person in the global north. So we have these statistics, we can calculate them, we can use them. Now, in ecological, environmental, social work will not tell you anything about that. That's why we needed this new paradigm, and that's why I developed it. And if you really want to understand it more, then you will have to read Green Social Work, because I'm very clear. But there's also a podcast where I explain the difference at great length. And it's on an Australian website. But if you do podcast plus Green Social Work on Google, you'll get it. I don't know the URL for it, sorry. I don't keep track of those things.
Okay. Okay, hope your explanation can answer the question from participant who still not clearly about the difference of the two terms. So student from undergraduate social welfare, you can ask Professor Lena your question. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, Professor. I think first and foremost, I'd just like to thank you for your time and your knowledge. It's all very valuable, and I'm sure we're all very honored to have you in our class today. So my question is regarding green social work and the situation where we're in now, which is the pandemic. The pandemic obviously has brought around a lot of changes within our work and lifestyle, especially in terms of how we interact and how we perceive the world and its sustainability. And my study group and I were wondering actually whether moving on forwards, do you think that this pandemic has long-term effects on green social work? And if yes, what are the major changes that we can expect in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a brilliant question. Yes, we are going to have long-term effects on social work and on society. Let me try and identify what I think those are. First of all, social workers have really suffered, and this is across the world because I've been working with social workers during the pandemic globally, are really suffering from not being able to engage with service users on a face-to-face basis. So they're telling me that they really don't want to keep this kind of way of relating to people for much longer. They want to go back to relationship-based social work. Now, there are lots of pressures on social work because it's underfunded in most countries that I'm aware of to try and make do with less, but do more with the resources they have. Relationship-based social work, and that's why in this country it was gotten rid of for two reasons. One, it was resource intensive. They need a lot more social workers than the 80,000 we have in this country if they're going to go back to when I was trained, it was relationship-based social work. But nowadays, social workers do not have 4 hours to spend with one person like I did. They're lucky if they get 10 to 20 minutes, half an hour. If you get an hour, you're doing really well. So we need to change that paradigm, and social workers here are saying they want to. They want to start arguing, and we have through our British Association of Social Workers, which I'm a member of and very active in. We have tried to argue for more resources, more training, more and better pay as well for social workers because they're very poorly paid in this country. So that's one thing that they said. The other thing is that, you know, we will have to get used to better hygiene. I don't know what it's like in Indonesia, but I certainly saw the plastic polluted rivers, which is no excuse for that. Absolutely none. And I refuse to accept that that's how people should behave. They should not. In the country, we don't have quite that bad, but on the roads, we have people throwing things out of the window of the car instead of putting it in a bag like I do and taking it home and then getting rid of it. So we need better hygiene. Here in the UK, before COVID, I used to take my disinfectant, you know, the little towelettes that you have. I used to take them with me to clean the tables every time I went into a restaurant because I would watch the worker who didn't have time to do a proper job. They'd go like this, then they'd use the same cloth on the next table. And what were they doing? Carrying whatever germs there was on that table to another one, to another one, and another one, and adding to the viral load, as we call it now. I couldn't stand that, so I used to take my own. And before I sat down, I'd clean the table and the chairs off. We should not have to do that, but that means that small businesses will have to keep clean. But I also noticed that Indonesia, and I thank Ibu Fentini for taking me to one of these amazing restaurants where I really loved the food you had, that everyone went before they sat down, washed their hands. And I thought, oh, we could do with that in the UK, because people don't, you know, you have to take your own and wash them, you know, in a little bottle like I do. So I think that's part of that hygiene. And we can learn from each other how we can best cope with that. But we need a public education, and social workers can do this. And I saw that Arif asked this question in the chat, what can social workers do? We need public education campaigns to say to people, actually, prevention, which we have very little time in social work to do, is more important than the cure. Because if we can prevent people from being dirty by throwing away their rubbish, or by keeping themselves clean, or by paying a worker to go and clean after you, a decent wage, then we won't have that problem. But I think we will probably have COVID-19 with us for a long time yet. Not necessarily, and this we don't know the answer to this, even the scientists don't. We don't know what new variants will come because we haven't vaccinated enough people. You have to vaccinate at least, according to the physical scientists, 75 to 80% of your population. We haven't done that in England either, which is why we've got the Delta variant, which came to the UK from India originally. We haven't got that under control. And it's a long story, which I won't go into, of why we're not, because the government failed to do its job properly. But I'm not going anywhere until that is brought under control. I have my 2 jabs. I'm very fortunate to be amongst those 40 million people in the UK who have them. But still, we are nowhere near 85%, which is the minimum. And I think we ought to go for 100%. But it's not good enough just to do it in the UK. We have to do it globally. And they're saying, and even the G7, which met in the UK last week, they're saying, oh yeah, we're going to give 1 billion doses. And I think, hang on, there are nearly 8 billion people in the world. You need at least 16 billion doses to cover the whole world. So get off your backside and do something sensible. You have to get manufacturing of the vaccine, take the patents away from people, because the governments can do that. They just need to pass a law that says, for the time being, you will only be able to get a very small return. And anyway, most of it, like AstraZeneca, it was taxpayers like me who paid for the development because it was done in a public university, of which I'm employed by one, in Oxford. And I paid taxes so they could do that. But the government is now saying, oh yeah, but we can't afford to do this forever. So we need to get private industry in. So the minute you get private industry in, because Oxford could have manufactured the vaccine that they developed if they were given the resources to build a factory that they controlled. And they were committed to giving it free to everyone who needed it across the world. They still are. But AstraZeneca is saying, oh no, we need to make money. So they have kept, it's being manufactured in only a few countries like India, but they're having problems because there's not enough culture. The culture for AstraZeneca is being manufactured in Italy, but it's going through a 3rd wave of COVID, and so it's not manufacturing very much. So we're going in a vicious circle because we're not breaking it by trying to think creatively about how we can go outside the box. So I fear that we will have to social distance for a long time. We will have to wear masks for a long time, and masks should be disposed of properly. And you can't use disposable masks. I've been doing it for over a year now because of my environmental concerns. What I do is I take a mask out. So I have 2. I use one when I'm using it, and the other one is being disinfected until I can use it again. What you do is you hang it outside in the fresh air for a day. Then you put it in a plastic Ziploc bag, leave it there for a minimum of 72 hours. I leave it in there for a week to be safe. And then you use that one again. And because it's not washable, I do have a washable one that you just wash, it's easy. but you don't need to throw them away. And when you do throw them away because they're broken, you should not put them on the roadside. Like I've walked down the streets of the UK and seen masks, and I think, what on earth are they doing there? They couldn't even be bothered to put it in a waste bin. So those are all things that we can do and need to do as social workers, and public education campaigns, lobbying governments for the resources we need to do jobs like mobilizing communities so they understand the risks that COVID in the future will face for us, and work with the physical scientists so they can give you the statistics that I've been quoting at you all morning.
Okay, thank you, Professor Lena. Harfidia Rahmi, you can ask directly to Professor Lena.
Okay, first of all, I would like to say sorry because it's currently raining on my home, so there might be some background noise. And thank you for Professor Lena for this opportunity. So on one of the presentation slides mentioned about limiting the current models of urbanization and industrialization. In certain cases, urbanization and industrialization have important roles in improving the society. With limiting these things, it might be possible to minimize degradation and structural inequality. But what about the negative impact that comes with the limitation with these limitations? Is there any benchmark or guideline in determining whether these limitations are necessary to do?
Yeah, there are. What I'm talking about is not urbanization and industrialization as such, but how they are carried out. Industrialization now means mega or hyper. I call it hyper industrialization. You do not need buildings in China. Those pictures I showed you in Xi'an, those buildings are over 33 stories high. When I first went to China in 1980, and I hadn't qualified as a social worker then, I was doing my Ph.D., they said they would never build above 6 stories because it wasn't safe to evacuate people during earthquakes. Now, we do not know whether it's safe to evacuate people from 33 stories. Civil engineers tell me only 13 stories can we assure people that they will get out safely. And I was looking at these, and I don't know if you remember, there were towers going up like that, and then there were little things in the low ones in the bottom. And because they're all so close together, sideways, and I was thinking, well, if the buildings go like this and above 13 stories, we don't know what will happen. What's to stop the buildings from hitting each other? In the back, in the sides, because there's so many of them. And the civil engineer said, we don't know. We just hope it won't happen because the Chinese government is the one who decided this. Why? Because there's a policy saying we want to have cities, they want to move everyone out of the rural areas, which is wrong, because we need people to live in the rural areas as well as in the cities. So fit the whole population into urban areas, they have to have high rises, and they will get higher like they have in Hong Kong. They're about 120, 150, 160, 180 stories high. But the Chinese government said, we want no city smaller than 16 billion people. Now, London, which is our biggest city, is 9 million, not 16 million. And that's going to be the smallest. That's our largest. The next largest city is Glasgow and Birmingham with 2 billion people in the UK. So that's why I'm against hyper urbanization, and I'm against industrialization that doesn't care about the environment. So we can still manufacture things. You could even have a coal-powered fire station if you captured in all the pollution that you let out into the air. If you put caps on the chimneys, captured it, and then recycled everything. Some power stations are doing that, but they should make that requirement compulsory for all of them. But the governments haven't done that. So it's about policies driving or not driving change. And for me, the answer to your question is that I don't think people like, if I were a child, I would hate to live in one of those high rises. Where would I play? Inside my little tiny flat? You know, I had a huge garden when my child was little because I wanted him to run around and I wanted to play football with him and all sorts of other things out in the garden. So it's important that we have houses that people actually want. Now, there are a few people, very rich people, want to see everybody else and pretend they're up there in the sky. So they like what they call penthouse apartments, and they live in those. They don't live down on the ground receiving the pollution from these mega buildings. They are living on top of them, sending it down. So that's why it's an unequal society, and it still privileges the better ones. So what I want are the small cities we used to have and still have, thankfully, in the UK, where people are still living. The UK is still incredibly rural for a very sophisticated, industrialized society. We have lots of people living in rural areas. And I think that is important that we keep people there, but we shouldn't keep them there poor. They should be there with decent housing, decent access to getting in and out of cities to do things that they want to do. Because cities are a source of innovation and change. But so were rural areas before we invented cities in this country, in the UK. They, you know, the spinning wheel was invented in a rural area. The steam powered stuff were invented for rural areas for the cotton mills. The steam train was invented in Edinburgh. That was an urban area. But urban areas in those days were terrible. If you read The Making of the British Working Class, you will see that poor people and working class people lived terrible lives, full of disease, squalor, bad housing, no education, and no health. We do not want that for anyone. So I'm arguing for small, self-sustainable communities where they have to be of a certain size so that you can have schools and educational facilities. I accept that, you know, for universities, I don't want a university in every little village, thank you, but I want them in nice villages and cities, rather not villages, cities like Durham, which is small, it's got 35,000 people. Stirling, which has about 28,000 people. So you can have universities in small cities that have hospitals and all the other resources that you need. But we don't have big, tall high rises here. We have some 6, 8, 10-story buildings. Ideally, they should be about 6 to 8. But, you know, I accept that in some cities, you might want them to go up to a little bit higher than that, but not over huge like the ones that we have in Hong Kong and China. And I hasten to add, I saw many of those in Jakarta too. And that's why it's sinking, because those buildings are also very heavy, and your soil under the ground, even though engineers thought, you know, we'll build them on rafts, that will mean they'll move around and sway. But the rafts don't deal with all of the problems. You know, we didn't think about when you dig so far down and the weight is so heavy that it's going to sink, because that's just physics. But if you'd had a physicist looking at that instead of just a civil engineer, you would have been able to work that out. So that's why I'm saying we have to have all the people at the table, and we have to have social workers who like asking awkward questions like I do. Like, why are you doing it like that? And what are the consequences of that decision? Not just now, but in the future. Do you know what will happen to a building as it starts? Because all buildings settle and sink a little bit. Even a one-story house will do that. But it's usually not noticeable unless there's some other problem under the ground. So that's my answer to your question. There's lots that can be done. You don't need mega hyper industrialization and urbanization to do it. It's better for human beings and children to grow healthily, not to.
Okay. Thank you,
Thank you,
Professor
Professor.
Lena. Professor Lena, there are questions in chat. Maybe you can read that, or I will read
Yes,
for you.
I saw that. Yeah,
Arini.
I saw that earlier on.
From
Arini. From yeah,
Arini.
Yeah, I saw that earlier, but then you kept giving people opportunity to ask questions, but I did see that. Yeah, Arini, it's an easy question. I've been giving you examples all through my talk, but let me just recapitulate some of the answers. So I gave you the example because it's the best one in Argentina, where the entire village of 40,000 people. So it's not a small village. Here, we would consider it a town because our villages tend to be much smaller than that. But every one of those 40,000 people, and it was social workers called community development workers, but they're still part of the social work profession, were helping people develop alternatives, because they went into the community as social workers and they said, what do you want us to do? And when they talked to the women said, well, we're sick and tired of having to spend hours every day. First, we have to go and get the water. Then we have to go and get the firewood just to basically cook and eat and live. And so they said, well, you don't have to do that anymore. They said, yeah, we know about solar this and solar that and wind powered this and wind powered that. Now you can use ground heat pumps, air heat pumps, and all sorts of things that we didn't have then. And they said, we can't afford them. So the social workers were the ones that said, but we know that there are NGOs that give us money to do things. So we will start a project here. So they started a project, which was to provide every single person in that community with a free solar panel and with a free cooking stove, so that they didn't need to go. And they also helped them because they now had solar panels. They could bore deep into the locality to bring water from its own locality. And they also could have pumps to bring water from further away if they needed it. So that solar energy was what we used to build our cities and our towns and our villages and give them water supply, sanitation, electricity, telephones, broadband, and all the rest of it. So we still haven't done that in the UK, except there's a wonderful island in Scotland called the island of Egg, E-I-G-G. So it's got an extra I in it from the egg that you eat. And that now is a small island, but it is 100% renewable energy. You cannot drive unless it's an electric car in that island, and they make you not drive because it's a small island. They say, most of you can walk unless you need a wheelchair or something like that because you have mobility problems. They also have, everything is either wind driven because they get a lot of wind. We get a lot of wind in Scotland. Haven't seen a windless day yet in the time I've been here. We also get quite a lot of sunshine. I showed you the sunlit garden earlier on. So they do that in the Isle of Egg. So, and that was, social workers were very important in mobilizing the community. And speaking to people and saying, this is why we need to do this. And now they lead the example in Scotland for the rest of us, which is great. And we need more people taking their lessons. Social workers can also build roof gardens. Like I gave you the example of Burnside Gorge, the picture of it in British Columbia. Social workers were the ones who helped the people build their recycling projects, including what you could do by cutting out plastic bags into tiny little strips so you could crochet them as you would wool. Yeah. So, but it means that social workers have to be creative and get people engaged. I think in Indonesia, there is a big, huge role for social workers around waste disposal, recycling waste, making sure that the environment is cleaned up, the beaches and the beautiful rivers you have. Get rid of all those plastic bags full of rubbish. Get the people involved. Government won't care unless it affects them. But we care as social workers because we see people living in degraded environments when they don't need to. And sometimes people don't think. It's not that they're just kind of like, oh, well, I'll just go here. And so there are a few. We have them here. We call them litter bugs. They just throw everything away and let somebody else clean up after them. But we have laws against it, and we fine them if we catch them. And other people like me go after them. I run after them if somebody throws something on the pavement, and I run after them and say, excuse me, I think this is yours, and give them whatever they dropped. And they look at me like I'm an idiot. But, you know, we can all do things like that. So there are lots of things we can do. And the other thing is to sit at the policy making tables, because I told you about policies that are not environmentally friendly. And we can explain to governments why, and make sure that you have your data. Look up what you need to know before you go there, and then argue your points. Most of the time, policymakers haven't got a clue what the impact of their decisions are. We can tell them. So those are all things you can do as a social worker. I hope that helps you.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe just one question anymore, because time limit, and we will have a photo session in the end of our event today. Okay, just one question. Okay, student. Hello. Halo, mahasiswa. Or, ayo.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Thank you for Professor Lena for the inspiring presentation. Me and my study group would like to ask you a question. Since we came from another side of the world, it seems like green social work is more familiar in developed countries. Meanwhile, here in Indonesia, or maybe other developing countries, is still unfamiliar. But how do you see the urgency of green social work to be applied in developing countries? Meanwhile, the people are unfamiliar with the concept, and it's in pandemic era where it's become more important, I think. But how does this can be applied in developing countries in your view?
Well, I hate to tell you, green social work is not that popular in the UK yet. It's very popular in China, very popular in India. It's very popular in Africa. So it is mainly the global South that has picked up on green social work. I think mainly, but they're mainly community development workers. I'm also a social and community development worker. That's where I started working in social work. I think here in the UK, the biggest barrier is the bureaucratization of social work and the focus primarily on child protection, safeguarding older people. So having corrected that, what can be done? Because I used to go, now I use Zoom and Teams to connect with people in these countries to talk about green social work to them. Because I went to China originally 30 years ago because I was invited to help them develop social work, not green social work. I didn't know about it then. I hadn't thought about it. But social work, and to develop good social work practice. So after about I guess, 25 years when I started becoming confident, because it took me a while to develop green social work from 2004 to 2012 before I published Green Social Work. I had to gain confidence myself in how to deal with the questions people asked me, how to deal with the connections I needed to make between the physical and the social sciences. So since then, I have been going wherever I've been invited, and sometimes I invite myself if people are talking to me about environmental degradation, and I say, do you know about this? And if they say no, I say, do you want to find out? And if they say yes, I then volunteer, like I did here, to talk to people. And I also hope that having talked to people, they will understand it and will talk to other people about it. So it's kind of like the snowballing effect. So hopefully, you know, you are in a very prestigious university in Indonesia. You will be able to read about this because there are lots of materials online that are freely available. And if you can't find something, you can always email me and say, Lena, I'm looking for this that you've written. Can you send it to me? And if I have it, I will send it to you. And then I always give people permission to pass that on for free. I'm not one of these companies that thinks I need to make a profit from knowledge. As far as I'm concerned, knowledge is everybody's right, and it's a human right to knowledge and it's a social justice issue in my ethical framework. So that's how I do it. And so I've been to many, many countries, Latin America, Africa, and I have helped people in the Philippines, for example, with green social work, and talked to them about green social work and child protection, because there are issues about green social work coming into child protection. And most of the people who need to be protected in terms of child protection and older people safeguarding live in poor housing conditions, are poor, have not enough money, and that is straightforward, ordinary social work. You go and deal with those, and then you add the green dimension, which is to try and get people housed in decent housing with electricity, running water, and all the rest of it. And it may mean that your next step, having provided emergency care for the people that ask for help, you start a community action program about bringing in infrastructures and resources, especially around water and how to do that sustainably, because that's green social work, electricity through solar panels, and all of those things. We now know a lot more than I did. You know, in fact, I'm supposed to be writing another book on green social work, and I just haven't had the time to do it yet. But it will come, hopefully, in the next year, if I can manage it, because we need to learn from the lessons that I've learned. But it's sharing, because the lessons I've learned, I have learned from many people all over the world, and I always acknowledge them and their contributions. So that's my response to how you can do it. It's mobilization, getting back to what we did when community work was seen as an important part of social work. Remember,
Okay,
three elements of social work: group work, community work, and one-to-one work. Those were the three main methods of social work. And now people focus on one-to-one work. We've got to get back to group work and community work, because everything that happens to people happens in their communities. It's where they live that matters. So I have now developed, it's not in my green social work book because it was developed before then, narratives of place and space. People are attached to their communities. They want to belong to their communities. So it's not good to have the policy like the Chinese government says, we will move everyone from the rural areas into urban areas. They want to stay in their rural areas. Let's develop the rural areas. Let's get social workers standing up for people. Now, it may be dangerous in some situations, so it's not up to me to tell you what to do in your country. You have to decide what is doable in your country. But talk about it in groups with local people and bring in, like I bring in politicians. When I was doing the Giles Gate project, which is written up in Green Social Work in Durham, I had our MP, which is our closest that I can get to government in England, our member of parliament for the area. She came to everything. And, you know, we were creative and imaginative. And I said, look, you've got to do something useful in this community, not just say, yes, you support us. And I would make her do things in the community, which she did very gladly because she wanted to. She was a social worker, believe it or not, a long time before. And I used to involve her in giving awards to the community. So I would give awards to the people who did the most inventive and ingenious intervention in green social work. And I would say to them, you choose who should get, not me and the member of parliament sitting together deciding, because yes, we did know what was going on in the community, but we wanted them to choose, and they did. And then I would go, because there was no funding for that, I just did it off my own bat. And I would go and buy beautiful things for them to have as the awards, and with an engravement on the back so that they could show it to everybody. And they were so happy. And yes, it did get put in the newspapers, and the MP gained more brownie points because she was involved in the community doing things with them. So it's a win-win situation. You have to look for win-wins, because then you carry people with you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Lena, for your valuable and insightful speech or lecture today. Yeah? We are approaching the end of our time. So maybe you can give a closing remark, Professor Lena?
Well, I'm just looking at some of the comments in the chat, and it's wonderful that people are really engaging with this, and thank you for the they were great questions, very inspirational, and I hope they will help you to become green social workers. And Ibu Fentini, you will have to tell me whether it's made a difference to the social work practice in your country. And also, I welcome hearing from the students as well. They have my email address. But what you should take away from this intervention, I think, is, first of all, it is absolutely crucial that you take the environment and its degradation seriously and try to develop alliances. And maybe you'll develop your own model, the Indonesian model of green social work. I know that in Croatia, I helped people develop an organization. When we could travel, I went there and stayed there for about a week, because you need more than just one lecture, I agree there. For a week doing a lot of really intensive work with them. And now they have their own green social work network with doing that. So you can do things like that in Indonesia. So try to think about how can we in Indonesia develop green social work, and what resources do we need to make that possible? And then how do we get those resources? Because that's really important. And look for, especially the state may help, but also NGOs, international NGOs. Get Bill Gates to come and help you develop green social work in Indonesia, for example. And if you want me involved, I'm more than happy to support you in that. Still do that at the end of the computer if COVID still prevents travel. So I think there are lots of things that you can do to make it possible. The second thing that I would like you to think about is what other initiatives you need to make green social work viable in your country. And that means forming alliances with disciplines and other professions. So in the pandemic, I was helping social workers anywhere, but especially in the UK, to link up with the health professionals. Now, they always were, but only if you worked in a hospital. And I was saying, you know what, you as social workers get to know when people are having problems adapting to COVID. This could be social isolation in the case of older people. So, you know, get the mental health workers, because in the UK, mental health and social work are linked, but they're separate. So they're in separate teams and they don't always talk to each other because you need an extra qualification to be a mental health social worker. So get to talk to them too. Get politicians involved, because if they're on your side, it's a lot easier to make policy changes. I can tell you, Roberta was very good, that's our MP in Durham, was very good at saying, okay, well, I'll go and take this up with so-and-so. We weren't always successful, so don't think that just because you argue your case, you will win it. Sometimes you have to keep going back, but don't lose heart. There are many, and you can read about these many wonderful experiences in the Global South in my handbook for green social work. Now, unfortunately, there's not a chapter on Indonesia, but there is one on the Philippines, for example. There's one on Sri Lanka. There are others nearby, India, China. So you can look at those and get inspiration from them. Not that you will be able to automatically copy what they've done, but you can get ideas for what you can do in Indonesia. There's one, like the one on waste management in Sri Lanka, is really, really good for what social workers can do to get supermarkets and buildings, apartment buildings, to take seriously recycling. So read that, that's really, really good. And it's in a developing, industrializing country. So lots of lessons there for social work in Indonesia. So I think those are my two key points that I would want.
Okay.
The rest, I hope you enjoyed the stories.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Have enjoyed being with you and wish it had been face-to-face, because it's always wonderful to visit people and get to know them personally. But maybe that'll happen one day.
Yeah,
Bente and I have been working together for a few years now. I'm sure we'll continue.
Okay, sure. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Lena, for your insightful and valuable sharing, presentation, and sharing mostly. Before we approach the ending of today's session, may I ask you all to turn on your camera so we can take the photo session before we close. Maybe from the faculty. Oh, I'm sorry, Professor Lena, the Dean of Faculty of Social and Political Science, send you a regard and a warm greeting and apologize that he can join with us in this afternoon. Okay, Crystal, maybe you can help us to take a photo session, and you all participants, maybe please turn on your camera.
Okay, Ma'am Dini, thank you for the chance to take pictures. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please turn on your camera, please turn on your webcam, and facing on the camera, I will speak in bahasa Indonesia. Kepada Bapak Ibu dan hadirin yang terhormat, silakan untuk menyalakan webcamnya, dan dengan posisi duduk yang nyaman, duduk menghadap webcam, dan dimohon untuk tetap dalam kondisi mute mic-nya. Halaman yang kami lihat di sini terdiri dari 2 halaman Zoom. So the photo session will take in the 2 slides. In the first place, the first slide will consist of 25. So for the first slide, on my mark, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Please hold it up. Please hold it a second. Thank you. Okay, the next slide, the second slide, the last one. On my mark, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Please hold. Okay, thank you, Ma'am Dini, for the chance. The question is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I need
Dini
to
masih mute.
for all of you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Lena. It is our honor and a rare and precious time today that we have you in our lecture, and we closing today's session with very insightful and provocating issue that you present to us. Yeah, maybe this is time that will separate us, that we can close our international public lecture today. Again, thank you very much for Professor Lena and all the participants who has interacted with today's presentation from Professor Lena. Okay, we can close today. Thank you very much and see you. And we hope this is not just one time. Maybe the next time we can make this this lecture again. Yeah, Professor Lena, maybe. So, okay, this is all for me. So maybe we can close the public lecture today.